All right, so before we jump back into TouchDesigner, we're gonna go through some different creative thinking for a little bit. And we are going to be visualizing sound in TouchDesigner and thinking creatively about it. So I encourage you, if you have a music file handy, an MP3 of somebody else's music or your own music, whatever it happens to be, if you have it handy, or if you have an instrument connected to your TouchDesigner right now, you can also use that. So we're going to be thinking about different characteristics of the sound. So hopefully you don't have the default TouchDesigner audio. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I am actually going to be probably working with that at first, just because that is the default one. We'll dive into that and then probably branch out. But we're going to be talking creatively about thinking about sound first before we start actually creating the visuals. So let's see, there we go. One of the examples I wanted to show you guys that was really interesting when I first found out about it. This is a study that they did with different shapes and how people perceive the connection between shapes and the sound that represents those shapes. So with these shapes, one of them is named Kiki and one of them is named Booba. So how many of you guys, so if this one's number one and this is number two, how many of you guys think which one do you think is named Booba? So if this is one and this is two, which one do you think is named Booba? Seems pretty unanimous, getting a lot of ones. Yeah, so this may seem like a really simple example, but this is basically insight into how we perceive visual characteristics in association with different sounds. So even though this is just a two-dimensional shape, we can extrapolate this core idea into how we think about different forms that we use to represent audio sounds. And so when we jump into TouchDesigner, we're going to be kind of taking the same idea, and it's going to be kind of our painting the fence exercise, starting very simple, but really focusing, because it's such a simple idea, focusing on the decisions that we make, such as the colors that we use, the forms, whether they're spiky or they're rounded, the way that they move, how fast they move, how many of them there are. So making certain decisions and consciously thinking about those decisions and how those represent or embody the sound that we're working with. So some things I want you to think about as we jump into this. When it comes to creativity, there are no rules. So when we go through this, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how I think about things and how I approach things. But ultimately, I want you guys to be fully creative in how you approach this and what intuitively feels right to you with the music. So when I give suggestions or go through this, I definitely don't want to say that something has to be this color or has to be this size, because there are definitely no rules when it comes to this. And I think the most important thing when you are creating that connection between sound and visuals is really allowing that intuitive aspect to play a role in how you bring those two elements together. So what I like to do, as weird as this may sound, for me, different sounds are kind of like different foods. And so there's really an appreciation for different types of sounds. You know, I definitely went through parts of my life where I listened to a specific type of music and that was all that I listened to. But as I got older, I really start to appreciate different sounds for the way that they, I guess, stimulate the mind in very different ways. And so it really is like different foods. And so you don't want to eat the same food every day. Getting a full range of different flavors and different textures and all those things really expand your horizons. And each sound does have several different characteristics that if you really allow yourself to kind of open up and bring those sounds into your mind and fully experience them, then you start to develop that intuitive connection between how those sounds could be converted to visual representations. Or you'll hear me say a lot embodiment, because to me, like, that's really what it feels like, is you're embodying these sounds in a visual element. So it's not just that you're creating something that kind of responds to the sounds and it just kind of jumps up and down or does something in response to the sound, but really what I think you should aim for, and what I always try to do, is embody those sounds in their own form, that it basically, those forms take on those sounds themselves. So some things to think about is your color choices. And this is very general. So as I mentioned, there are no, shouldn't be any absolute rules, but in general, things to think about is how colors affect the mood of what you're working with. So if something is very dark, then of course, you might want to go with darker colors, things like that. So that creates a certain mood. Interesting thing, when I did a talk similar to this at FITC in Toronto, and I played some music and I had people imagine what colors they thought the music should be. And it was right after I played a black and white video, and the music was very higher pitched, synthy, airy sounds, a lot of reverb. And to me, it was very colorful, but it was right after I played a black and white video. And when I asked people if they thought it was colorful or black and white, everybody said black and white, which was really interesting, because then I did it somewhere else and I didn't play that video before. And then everybody said that they experienced color or felt that the song was very colorful. So it's, there's a lot of things that come into play. So again, there's no absolute rules on this, but you as the artists are the ones that dictate what you feel that connection should be. So when you listen to the music, and I do this a lot, if I'm visualizing, intentionally visualizing one specific song as opposed to creating sound for something I've already done, then I'll listen to it over and over and really take in that music and experience it in a way that I have an understanding of what I want the visual representation of that to be, instead of just jumping in and then creating something, you know, from scratch that might not match it. So a lot of times my work is black and white, just a personal choice, because I like to focus on form and texture and movements and a lot of other things, which is why I don't use a lot of color. But that's just a personal choice. So for you guys, I encourage you to think about how those colors can represent the sound in different ways. Another thing to think about is form. So there's a lot of different ways to approach creating your visuals. We're going to be working in TouchDesigner. So if you're doing generative visuals, a big thing about generative visuals is working with form. And so for me, what I like doing is, as you probably saw in the earlier examples of my work, is creating forms that really have personality, that takes on the personality of the music. But there's different ways that those forms behave. So how do those forms express the properties of that sound? And one thing that I like to do that's probably a little bit weird, and if you guys are watching this recording not live, and I think you won't be able to see me doing this, so so you'll have to use your imagination. But one thing that I like to do is basically when I listen to the music, I kind of move my hand. And so if you listen to the music and you start to actually move your hand with it, I mean, you can move your whole body too, like dancing is great. But if you're going with a minimalist approach, if you move your hand and you try to synchronize with the music, then take note of what your hands are doing. And that will really give you, I think, in my process, it really helps give you good insight into the overall tempo of the music and the flow of what the visual should be. Because if you look at it, there's obviously the BPMs, but sometimes with songs, it's not just about the exact BPMs and trying to match that with your visuals. There's an underlying melody that's carried throughout it. And if you allow yourself to move with the music, then you can more easily pick up on that melody and those nuances and what the core feeling and mood of the music is. And so I highly recommend, my advice is to really let yourself get into the music. And maybe it is something that has a lot of bass to it, and you know, you are moving with the bass and that's the most prominent thing in it, and you definitely want to visualize it. Or something, if you're listening to classical, then there might be a lot of highs, a lot of lows. It might be, you know, all over the place. You know, sometimes classical is really, you know, more fluttery and all over the place. But if you allow yourself to kind of follow that with your hand, then you really start to develop this visceral sense of what the music is doing. So going into, yeah, the movement. So how does the music change over time? You know, is it one consistent thing when you listen to the overall arc of the sound? If it's a song, does it actually change over time? Is there a climax at the end? Does it, you know, is there a build up? And then what's the overall movement of the music? So, you know, sometimes with maybe some electronic music, there's not maybe as much complexity over time. And so maybe it's a little bit more consistent, and then you can do a certain form that has behaviors that incorporate the general idea of the song, and you can kind of just get away with different camera movements. But a lot of times if it's something that does have more of a story to it and more complexity, then thinking about how to build that up over time and do different changes of scenes and things like that, and introducing different things into it that really capture what the core idea or core story of that song is. And then of course that was also going into the evolution of it. So starting to think about those things, we're going to jump into TouchDesigner, but we're going to kind of get into the creative and the technical now. So we are still going to talk about the technical parts of TouchDesigner and setting up an audio-reactive scene. But as we're doing this, we're also going to focus heavily on making those creative choices with the music and trying to match it the best that we can. And it is hard since I can't see everyone. Hopefully you guys are all doing stuff with your hands and going along with it. I don't know. But hopefully everybody found music that you like, that inspires you, that you want to visualize. We're going to start, as I mentioned, with the kind of painting the fence Karate Kid exercise, relatively basic, starting at the beginning to one, basically show people who are new to TouchDesigner a very simple visual setup that we're going to branch out on. But two, I used to teach graphic design, and one of the things that we do a lot is basically strip away a lot of what you can work with and have people focus on really core simple ideas and how much they can do within that very simple idea. So if you jump inside the visual start, so we're going to jump inside here. So what we have is our sphere, classic, going to our noise. If you aren't new to TouchDesigner, you've seen this set up a million times, I'm sure. And then we're basically just here, we're just creating the normals so that it looks nice and shiny and glossy. And then this is our render setup. So we have our geo, camera, light, and that's basically just converting our 3D geometry so that it can be rendered to a 2D image. And then we have that being composited over a black background and our out. So this is our very simple setup that I've given you to start out with. And what we're going to do is there's a process that I wanted to introduce. We're going to do it one way first. And because this might be new to people who have been using TouchDesigner for a while, we're going to start with the easy way first. And then I'm going to introduce a method that I've been using recently that might be new to TouchDesigner users also. So what we're going to do is we're going to start to build this out using our audio. And we're going to try and get this to really embody the sound the best that it possibly can. So we're going to make choices about the movement of it. We're going to make choices about the behaviors, about the colors, about different effects that we add to it. And so what we're doing is really consciously trying to embody whatever sound you've chosen the best that we can. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to go to split screen for a second. So if you come up here to your pane layout and you click on the double screen, okay, and I'm going to move this over, and on the left side, I'm going to back out. Okay. And so this is why I set this up this way specifically for the workshop, and hopefully something that you guys can use in the future. And so we have currently our low, mid, and high. And if you jump inside, we have, of course, our kick and our other things here. If you want to switch between the attributes that you have to work with to map to the audio, I set up a switch so that you can go to different things. So like if you just wanted to work with this very last one that gives us the low, mid, and high and the kick detection and snare, then you can change these here. So what we're basically doing is figuring out what properties we want to get from the sound and then sending those to our output. Okay. And then what I'm going to do up here, actually, let's go ahead and add, I'm going to add a null here just so we will work from that one. Okay, so again, I clicked the output connector, which I think should have a fancier name, but it doesn't. And I think Rob should get on that because I think Rob would come up with a great name for it. Just saying. So we're going to click the output connector and we're going to add a null. Okay, and so that gives us the information that we are sending out of here. So here's our base. We're literally just sending that out to here for easy access. Okay, so with our split screen and our visuals here, we're going to do similar to what we did before. And I'm just showing you the process first, and then we'll branch out to actually adding stuff to our visuals. If you lost your parameters here, you can just click P. And I'll bring up your parameters. So if you remember from last time, here's the values that we have that are pulling from the audio. Here's the setup with different parameters visually that we can control. They are both numbers. So because numbers and numbers, anything that we want to map to a parameter, as long as it's a number, right, which all of these are numbers, like this we couldn't map to because this is a word, this is not a number, but all of these are numerical values. And so we can map this to control any of these parameters. So I'm going to jump to our noise here, which has lots of fun stuff that we can change. So our noise currently is looking like this. So before I map it, you can, if you want to play with some things, get an idea for like what different things do. So if you're new to TouchDesigner, you can kind of just move some of these sliders and see what each thing is controlling. Okay. And just for a single example, before I show you an additional way that we're going to do it, let's say that I wanted to control, let's do amplitude, right? Pretty classic. So we want to control the amplitude of the noise. I'm going to come over to my low, mid, and high here. Oh, I'll turn up my audio volume a second. It's pretty low right now. So I can grab my high, for example, drag it over on top of, what do we do, the amplitude. So drag it to the word amplitude and let go. And we're going to click on export. And yeah, like I said, it's really low. So I'm going to go over here to my audio source. And let's see, bring up that. Maybe even higher. Actually, let's just go inside here. I might bring this way up just for this example. Okay, so that's the just the showing the process of how to map things. So again, I'll do that one more time in case anybody missed it. So here's, we've isolated, you're basically like creating like a tool chest, right? So here's the values that we want to be able to work with. So we're pulling out characteristics of the audio that we want to be able to work with and map to control things. And then we are looking at characteristics of the visuals that we want to have controlled by those characteristics, right? So it's basically two parts, like super simple. On one end, we're pulling out characteristics from the audio. On the other side, we have parameters of the visuals that we want to have directly controlled by the audio. Okay. So actually I'll do one more and then I'll show you kind of a technique that I've been using recently that should hopefully make your lives a little bit easier. I know it's definitely made my life easier. So we'll do that in just a second. I want to show one more. So let's say at the end here that I wanted to, we'll add a level. Oops. We'll add a level there. If you want to add anything to the network, so we have an out at the end, right? So we can just add that to the very end. If you want to add anything to the network, you can stay within this pipeline here and click our output connector. And then that will bring up your create dialog. And then you can, purple has to stay with purple. I know I'm overly simplifying this right now because I want to get you guys to creating visual stuff. But basically the purple family goes to anything purple. Notice that there's only a few other things that it can go to convert to the other things. So if you want to add something after the render, right, we have a lot of different effects. So if I click on this, we are now in the top category, right? Because we're working with 2D textures. So we have all sorts of filters that we can use. So we have our level, which is going to be like our brightness contrast. We can do like fit and all sorts of other things to it. So right now we're just going to use the level because there's a lot of options. So we'll go with the level. And once again, because practice makes perfect. If we wanted to, let's say, not component, let's go to the level. If we wanted to invert it, and let's say that I have the invert mapped to my kick detection, right? So I can just grab my kick detection, grab it over to, or drag it over to invert, let go, and export. Okay, and so then it's going to invert it. And again, I have to adjust my volume because now the kick's really high. Actually, since we are pulling from that this thing, right? So I'm jumping inside here, right? Because I can see that my kick is always 1, so it's not really doing much in terms of changing the kick parameter. So because with this one, we are pulling from, I switched it to this one, we can change the, here, probably take the gain down, I think. Make sure we click on the plus sign. Maybe. Why is my gain not working? Maybe we can do it up here also. I don't know why it's not responding. Choose threshold. Good. Okay. We'll come back to that. I don't know why the gain is not responding to me clicking. So what we're going to do, so now it starts to get into the creative part, is we're going to start to build out different characteristics that respond to the sound. So hopefully you guys have your own audio playing. If you need to turn it up, remember, if you need to hear it, you can go back to your audio source and you can turn up your output volume. Or if that's not working, then feel free to jump inside the network and then you can turn up. Remember, this one's the one that's going to the audio out. So you can turn up the volume on the math. And I'm going to turn it down so you guys can hear it on my end. So what we're going to do, and I'm going to close this. This is a method that is kind of new, as I mentioned, to that I just started using recently, and it might be maybe new to some TouchDesigner users, I think, because it's a fairly different way of working. So usually what we would do is that method that you saw where we would export and drag things to the parameters, just like we were doing a second ago. But what I've started doing recently, and hopefully this makes your life easier because it does for me. Normally what happens is that you have all these parameters that are mapped to stuff. And then if you want to change it, then you have to go in and like you might have a very complex network, but then you have to go to the operator and find what it's mapped to. And you're kind of diving through your network and going to different places to try and find different things that are responding to the audio. So one method, I don't want to turn this back down. There we go. So one method that I started using is, so we're inside of our visual network. What I'm going to do is right click and go to customize parent component. And what that's going to do is that's going to give me these options to basically customize this base here. So as I mentioned, the base is a container. So all of the visual stuff is inside of here. So what we can do is customize the component, which is what I did for these, right? So we customized it so that we have access to the parameters very easily on the top level. And so what we're going to do is inside here is anytime that we see a parameter that we are interested in changing, instead of dragging things individually to these different operators, and it might be kind of buried inside, anytime that you find something that you might want to change, we're going to drag it to our custom parameters so that we will have easy access to it on the top level. And creating custom parameters isn't new, but at least for me, the process of thinking about it in terms of isolating what I want to have access to and then being able to bind stuff is a lot tidier than the process that I used to use when I first started using TouchDesigner. So this is what I'm going to show you guys. So the first thing that we're going to do is under custom operators. Let's go ahead and actually, we don't need to do this, but just so that we can, we'll call it controls. I think if you don't add a page, it's just going to leave it as the custom. Actually, sorry, I'm retracting. If you put control, that's fine. But it should just leave it as control. So there's no need for us to add a second page to that. So we'll just keep it simple. All right, so what we're going to do, and as I mentioned, this might be new to some TouchDesigner people, might not be, but just in case, I will go relatively slow and do a few times. So let's see that on this one, so we have all these parameters, and I probably want to have access to, we're going to go through in order. Let's say that I want to have access to the seed. So I'm going to click on the word seed. Oops, sorry, don't click and hold too long. Click on the word seed and drag it over to the custom parameters under where it says parameter, and let go. And once you let go, you're going to select bind new parameter as master. And once we have that there, so it should turn purple. And then what I'm going to do, here's where we create our options. I'm going to right click again and go to open parent parameters. So our parent parameters are going to give us a view of what we would normally see if we were up one level. So if we're up one level, and then this is this box here, which is the same as this one here. Okay, so all that we're doing, access to that while we're inside here. So it's a different approach to your workflow so that you don't have to dive into the different operators. So we're going to put this aside for now and just kind of tidy this up, trying to drag, but it's underneath my screen share thing. Sorry, hold on. I have my screen share on directly on top of it. It's not letting me grab it. There we go. Okay. All right. So you can see that now that we've added our seed, we now have access to that under our custom page, and it's right there. Okay. And so the next step, we're going to add a lot more to this, but the next step then would be, once we have this as a bound accessible value, then what we can do is, now we have easy access. We can drag and drop this to our custom parameters, export shop, and then it's going to control that. And then the reason that I set it up this way is because with TouchDesigner, you kind of keep wanting to move towards doing things as efficiently as possible. So the reason I set it up this way, again, is, to not have to navigate through the network, but it makes everything really easy and accessible. So that way, if I have several different, I know that's going crazy, we'll just leave it for a second. If I have several different containers or bases with several different contained visual scenes, then on the top level, I have easy access to every single parameter within that scene that I might be interested in mapping to visuals. And then also it lets me, let's say that I wanted to change the values here, or let's say that I wanted that to be changed to an input control method, then I can easily just change that, and it lets me do a lot easier than diving in. Right. So what we're going to do is basically right now we're at the fun part where as we're building up this network, we're going to collect our possibilities. So we're thinking through like ways that we could possibly change this, and we're collecting our possibilities. So let's go ahead and add a texture to this, or a color to this. So I'm going to double click, and I'm going to go to material, and we will go to, let's see, let's go to our, and we'll do Fong, sure. Fong goes well with the lighting that we already have, right? So once again, I double clicked, went to material, selected Fong. If you don't come from a 3D modeling background, Fong, it refers to specific lighting with the, it has a nice highlight as opposed to being a flasher lighting or a different type of light. It's a specific lit material. And then we can just drag it onto our geo. So I just clicked and dragged it up. And then once we have that, then we can change any of these values here. We can go in and we can change manually. Or if we wanted to be able to change the color through sound or through other control, then we could grab this value. Let's grab this value and drag it over to our custom parameters, if it works. Hold on one second. Let me grab that again. Grab that value, drop it. Ooh. All right. Oh, sorry, not this window, to our custom parameters. That would be why. Drag it over to component editor. Bind new par as master. Okay, and then that's going to show up right there. And let's see. So let's say that we wanted to set up a switch. Actually, before we, we're going to keep doing this, but I want to go back to think creatively. So some of you guys might have gone way ahead, which is totally fine, in thinking about how you want to visualize this. If not, then what I want you to start doing is, so when we add things like the material, let's go ahead and start to add the default color that we want it to be. So I turned down my music so that you guys could hear me. Depending on what music you have, think about what color you think represents that music. If you want it to be darker or lighter, sometimes it might be trial and error. But think about either what embodies the music, or aesthetically, maybe there's a certain look that you're going for that you want to work with the music, and maybe that aesthetic takes priority, and then you'll kind of work with it to get that aesthetic to fit with the music through different behaviors. So let's say that right now I'm more focusing kind of on the technical, showing you guys how to do this. Let's say that we wanted to do, I don't want to do bright colors. Oh, okay. For the sake of this, we'll do like this crazy bright pink color. And then let's say that we set up another. So there's two ways that we can do this. If we wanted to change color, there's two ways that we can do it. We can either map something to basically change these values with the audio. So like, let's say, for example, that I wanted to, oh, we should open our audio characteristics too. That is just going insane. That is looking so good, guys. You'll just have to imagine the music in your head because it's not playing right now, but I guarantee you whatever music's playing, that perfectly embodies it right there. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to, we're going to change the color. So let's say that I want to, these values are way too high. Sure, we'll just do the mid. So let's say that I wanted to just kind of alter the value a little bit. Then I can just go to my null here, grab whatever I want to map to it, and then drag it to the parameter that I've isolated to change it. And that is going to change that. And so that's going to be controlling that. So I mentioned there's two different ways to do it. So we're currently working with one color or one material, and we're changing the value here. Another option that we can do is we can grab our, let's go ahead and do a second Phong. And this one's going to be a totally different color. We'll keep it white for now. And then we can add a switch. So I mentioned that switches are used a lot in TouchDesigner. And to organize, oh, thank you. I'm reading the comments now. Expand analysis command. Which node did you adjust the multiply? Oh yeah, so a note on adding the, because this is important. Actually, let me throw down the switch and then I'll. Mark was asking, which node did you adjust the multiply parameter in? So on mine, and this is why, you know, figuring out what you think works best to organize your network. I can point out where it's going to start to bottleneck it and where you do have to kind of fine tune your network based on the specific project that you're working with. And so right, whenever you can see that my values are kind of great for specific mapping, but then they have to be remapped for other things. And so you were asking where I did the math or multiply parameter. So all of the values are coming from our analysis right now. So they're all contained inside of here. If I wanted to have different values, so I have the switch on. So actually these are the ones that are being fed. Let's say that I needed to have a modified version of the low. What I could do is break out here and add a, let's see, I meant to add that separately. So do kind of a breakout math operation. Oh, I did mean to select that. Insert operator, let's do a select. So let's say that I wanted to modify this value of, then I can use the out of here, use the select chop. And then under channel names, I can click this drop down and select low. And then I can use the math to remap those values. What I want to do in this example that I'm showing you is I want to keep all of these as they are, but I want to create a new value. And so let's say with this one that I wanted to select this and then multiply it by, let's say 0.5, right? So half the size just for this example. So basically you can multiply it, which is going to adjust that. You can also work with the range, which I do a lot. So range is a bit trickier in the situation because you have to know your from and your to range. So for this example, we're basically, we're just going to multiply it to lower the value here. And then what I would do is I would then use a merge and probably rename it too. So I would merge these. I'm going to rename it to something else instead of just, it's going to become like low 2. Let's call this low remapped. And then I can merge it. And then that would be in my output. I would then route that to, I know this is a crazy network right now. I'll kind of clean this up so you can see what I'm doing. So don't feel like you're limited to these. It's kind of the moral of the story is that you can break out and basically use a math chop to readjust and rescale the values any way that you want. And then basically create variations of these. So if you're doing a lot of stuff with the same, working with the mids in different ways, then that can come in handy so that, you know, certain values that work for one parameter might work great, and then you might have to change the values completely to use the mids, but then remap them to different value range for another parameter. Oh, wow, time went by fast. All right, so I know we're jumping around a lot here. I hope that, because we are getting to the end of it, I think, I hope that for people who are new to TouchDesigner, that everything that we show through the step-by-step, the different sections of it, that gives you guys enough to get started with the process of then breaking out and visualizing stuff. So if too much at this point, but I wanted to make sure that you guys saw the process of how it works. What I encourage you guys to do at this point is then you can keep going with what we were talking about of explore. So these are the channels. So at this point, you won't be necessarily using the channels, but at this point, if you break out here, you can explore different operators within the purple family, which is your texture operators. And that's going to be different ways of adjusting the image. And you can, especially with noise, because in this case, noise is driving a lot of what we're working with. You can play with a lot of those parameters, break them out here, and then play around with how it's mapped. And again, highly encourage you guys to think about, as you're building this out, really keep thinking about the audio and different ways to enhance how people experience the audio through your choices. So I hope that was helpful for everybody. And even if you have been using TouchDesigner for a while, I hope that maybe you guys were inspired in different ways to bring things into your workflow and still learn some new stuff if you're an avid TouchDesigner user. So are there any, I know we only have like a few minutes left. Are there any questions that anybody, how did you connect the analysis to null nodes? So on the, I think you're asking about here. So on the output, your network should have an out at the end. And then the out, you can see here, by having the out, it adds this connector here. And then the null, then you just, I'll go ahead and disconnect this here. You can click on the output of the connector and then drag it there, and then it should connect it. Did that answer that question? If not, just let me know if you had a different question, but hopefully that answered that. Would love to learn more about your audio production process. Oh, you know what? And what other tools do you use in conjunction with TD? Yeah, actually, so if we switch modes for just a minute, I did have some examples that I wanted to, it's more like an overview and just showing you the end result, but I would love to talk about the process of how I did it so you guys can get an idea for different workflows. So with this one, and I don't know if I'm going to get cut off because it is like 11 o'clock now. Can you guys let me know? Can I answer that question really quick and just go over a few workflows?
Yes, please. You can do it.
Okay, great. And if it's like hard stop. Okay.
No.
So I would love to share some workflow. So this is, let me present really quick. I'll just show a quick clip and then tell you about the process of it. So this, oh, hopefully you guys can hear me over it. So this was actually created in TouchDesigner, but this was working with another musician. This was, oh my God, Gaddy Sassoon, sorry, it's getting late. Gaddy Sassoon. And so for this project, I actually met up with him in Milan, is his studio, and he was gonna work on the music and I was going to work on the audio, and we basically started from scratch with that idea. And so he started working with some sounds on his synthesizers and I listened to it, and basically I got an idea for the feel of what we were going for, and then I started developing the visuals in TouchDesigner. And then so it was we were working on stuff at the same time, and then because I created the audio system or the visual system in TouchDesigner that reacted in real time to the visuals, then what that allowed him to do was then see how the visuals responded in real time to what he was creating. And so then he was able to create the audio while watching how the visuals responded and created the audio to coincide with the visuals. So it was developed together and then let him play while seeing the visuals. And then I tweaked the visuals a little bit while he was playing. So the setup for this was, so he had his modular synths, which were going through an audio interface. And the thing that I loved about this is because we were sitting down in person, I could tell him exactly what I needed from him. Then he was able to break out each signal from his synths that he was sending to me through the audio interface. So I had each signal isolated, and then I could basically, through this video, you'll see that the different sounds are really embodied in different ways because I was able to break them out in different signals. And so, so I really liked that process because then I didn't have to try and treat everything as one thing and then break it up. I actually had everything separately. So that was the workflow for that one. And then this one is, let me make sure I'm answering the question about audio projection process and what tools. Oh yeah, okay, so focusing on the audio side. So that one was modular synths with TouchDesigner. For several projects, I work with Ableton, which we haven't gotten into TD Ableton. Are going to do a part 2 of this, and so we will dive into TD Ableton then. So Rajat's asking that question, so you're probably familiar with TD Ableton, and so there is going to be a part 2 of this that focuses more on that aspect of it. But Ableton, which is highly integrated with TouchDesigner, I use that for a lot of projects. I also use, if the only thing that I'm concerned about is the audio analysis, there's also a Max for Live device for Ableton, which is called Live Grabber, that I've used for a bunch of projects, which is quite a bit more lightweight than TD Ableton. So if you really want everything tightly integrated and you want a lot of control, TD Ableton is excellent. If you just want to get the audio analysis from TouchDesigner and send it via OSC, sorry, from Ableton and send it via OSC to TouchDesigner, then there's a tool, Live Grabber. I'm looking it up so I can drag it over to show you guys. Really nice. Show sync, I think it's this one. So it's this one here. Looks like you can download here. They changed websites a couple of times. So Live Grabber is really nice because you can see a visual of what it's doing here. So basically you just put the analysis grabber on your track in Ableton, and it does the low, mids, highs like we did in TouchDesigner. And then you can send those values via OSC directly to TouchDesigner. And then that's one way of integrating Ableton with TouchDesigner, but much more simplified TD Ableton, I guess, if the only thing that you want is the audio analysis. To do the visualization, do you draw the frames first and the different modes and then try to match in Touch, or do you let TouchDesigner decide the visuals, or both? Hold on, to do the visualization first and different modes, or do you? Every project is kind of different. So I have different approaches. So basically I'll try to like branch out. So I work with a musician and then I know the music and then I visualize it. That's like a small percentage of the projects. Some other projects are like for the dome performances that I've done. It kind of starts with the visuals because the dome is obviously very visual. And so I start by developing the visuals and the theme and the different scenes that I want to basically tell the story in the dome. But then I will usually I'll create the visual system that's going to be live because everything's real time generative. So nothing is rendered, everything is real time. So I'll create the visual system and then I'll then usually go and compose the audio to go with the visuals. But since I like to be variable and not set in stone, what I'll usually do with the audio is have the audio be something that I can compose and manipulate in real time. So I never have a song basically like set in stone for the performances. It's usually something where I can compose the audio in real time and make choices about what I want it to sound like and the mood and the direction that I want it to go. And that is tightly integrated with the visuals during the performance. And so they're both kind of, usually during the performance, I'm kind of deciding and making those decisions about it. So what I'm really interested in is creating reactive systems that I can explore in real time, as opposed to creating things that are pre-rendered and already determined ahead of time. So I think that kind of answers the question. But it's kind of, it varies depending on the project. Like a lot of my personal projects that I showed examples of, as I'm learning new things and experimenting, then it really depends on, I'll take the thing that I'm trying to learn, and then I'll probably pair that with visuals, and then create visuals, and then pair that with writing audio for it. So it's kind of like creating and learning and challenging myself in the experimental realm at the same time. So there's a broad spectrum of stuff, I guess. And there was one last, so this was the, I'm kind of skipping over. So this was at Art Tech House. And I'll talk over it. So with this one, move. Hold on one second. The controls keep going over. House in Washington, D.C. And so with this one, there were several different scenes, and the core idea was of math, and I love the math behind sound, especially, as I mentioned, the different oscillations. And so this was working with basically the math behind different oscillators that go together in an auditory sense, but also interesting in a mathematical sense, the way that they work together. So each scene was a different way of representing the math behind those oscillators, and then doing like FM synthesis for the audio. So actually, I'll pause with this scene here, because it's not super obvious by looking at. With this scene here, the circles were squares were, of course, square wave, and then there's also triangles. So and the interactions between them, because there were multiple, because it's doing FM, there were multiple oscillators coming together in different ways. And so it's a very stylized, but directly visualizing the oscillators that are coming together to create the audio for this. So yeah, when you see the circles, that's the sine wave, and then the square. And then, so this is what the final version looked like. So this was another example, just talking about the process of, I knew the space that I was going to work with. So I wanted to design visuals that would work really well in that that space that wrapped around the entire venue. And this whole thing is being controlled with Mimu gloves. So basically I created the audio and visual systems, and then during the performance, then I'm using the gloves and doing different gestures to compose and make decisions about visuals in real time during the performance. Thanks. Do you create the audio system as an abstract instrument that you essentially play live? Sorry. So yes, you're not oversimplifying it. It is definitely, each project's different, but so I like to create, if it was totally open-ended, then it would obviously be a bit complicated during the live performance. So what I like to do is kind of like we were doing with the visuals, create variables can manipulate in different ways that have several different possibilities. And so, for example, that's why I love working with oscillators and with modular synths and things that you can work with them in so many different ways and different combinations, and doing different filters and bringing everything together. Doing live and being able to explore them once you're basically like into to create the system, like knowing the possibilities of how you can manipulate it and the range of what's possible, and getting comfortable with it, then in a live setting, then it's like a playground, but it's a playground that you know well enough to know how to navigate it, I guess. So I think maybe I over explained it. So, but yeah, so hopefully that explained the question. And that's kind of just like a sample of some stuff that I created. I guess everything that I do is based on what my core interests are, which is like really having these open-ended things. And so, and experimental. So like in future performances, definitely experimenting with like different ways of making sound. Like, you know, I've seen people that use, for example, tube lights and the electricity from the tube lights to like generate these really abstract sounds that like, I think sounds, as I was saying before, like sounds are unique and just very exciting. And so I definitely like experimental ways of creating sound and able to experiment with it live and involving the audience too. I'm kind of going on a thing right now, but you know, different ways of like, for example, if you're in a venue, like sampling the architecture from the venue in real time and then bringing that into the performance and then having whatever it is that you do during the performance being tied to that moment, and it can never be repeated other than in that moment. And so I think that's what interests me about doing these open-ended real-time performances is everything that happens is tied directly to that moment, and it can never be created again. You're pulling in from that exact reality. Interests me about it. Any other questions? So I think maybe we are wrapping up unless anybody wanted to ask any more stuff. And you guys are welcome, by the way, to please feel free to email me if you have any questions. I mentioned that we're probably going to do a part 2 to this. So this was like an intro. And I hope that everybody that watched this, if you're new to TouchDesigner, I really hope that this inspired you to dive deeper into it because it really is a great environment for building so many different things. So we'll be doing a part 2 sometime, I think next year. We'll let you guys know. A second, yeah, definitely. We already talked about it before this. We'll be doing a second part.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was pretty fun.
You.
Yeah, because we asked Ginger to do some of the basic stuff. So yeah, definitely she kind of ran out of time for that. So yeah, we are talking about we're gonna have a next round for this workshop to follow up today. Yeah. So yeah, hope
we really wanted to do something that was great for beginners, because a lot of stuff can be a little bit more in depth and it's really easy to get lost. So we really wanted to do something that was a really good introduction. And then the next one is definitely going to branch out. So hopefully you guys will be experimenting with some stuff between now and the next time.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
and like I said, I'll put my, oh wait, I don't know if I can put my email in the chat. We're not supposed to put personal stuff. Can I put my email in the chat?
Please.
Okay. So yeah, feel free to Ginger it's ginger@synthestruct.com as I'm typing it in. So please feel free to send me an email if you guys have any questions.
Ginger, you got a last question just above your comment.
And with what about modular synth? What about receiving trigger input? So it's not a short answer. Yeah, so because you have to have the right about trigger input. Actually, okay, so no, if you're not doing, I'll keep if you're not doing control voltage, so I might be reading too much into your question. So if you're just doing trigger input from that, if you're sending it to your modular synth, then you can use MIDI triggers out of TouchDesigner. So going out of TouchDesigner to your synth. If you're working with control voltage, then you have to make sure, obviously, that your system is set up correctly. Otherwise, you can really, it has to be like DC coupled. Otherwise, you could damage things. So that's why it's not a short answer. But if you're sending triggers to your modular synth from TouchDesigner, you can, actually, since I have it here, if you go to the, there's a couple different ways to do it, but there's a MIDI out. So you can set it up here and basically go out to your device. This is an oversimplified way of doing it, but if you want to send MIDI out to your synths, and then doing the reverse, it depends on how you have it set up. If you have MIDI that you can send to TouchDesigner, then you can do the MIDI in. So that's kind of like the short, quick answer, but we'll definitely dive into more complex stuff about that in the next one. But if it's control voltage, then it's more in depth because you have to make sure that you have everything set up correctly so you don't. Yeah, you're welcome.